The Founding Fathers, American Revolution, our Constitution, our history, America. Thanks so much for tuning in as we discuss the people, places, events, and battles that turned 13 separate colonies into the greatest nation on earth, the United States.
Welcome back, fellow Patriots. I'm your host, Ron Kern, and thank you so much for tuning in. And after our last show, which was a detailed bonus episode discussing letters from a Pennsylvania farmer, we are going to be jumping back into the American Revolution timeline. Before we do that, we recently lost an amazing historian, orator, author, and just a great and amazing man. David McCullough passed away on August 7th. He was such an expert on anything that he discussed, and even more so what he wrote about. And I really, really strongly urge you to watch some of his interviews and speeches. I've placed a couple of my favorites in our show notes as links, so I hope you take a few minutes to watch some of those. It's just an amazing experience that I want you to have. McCullough was an advocate of education and, more importantly, the reform of it. He oftentimes said that to be a great teacher, you have to love what you teach. I hope that in a minuscule way, I can live up to that, as the American Revolution is something that I love, I cherish, and I hope it comes through in this podcast as my passion, as it truly is. My wife and I are getting ready to start school again, where we teach the American Revolution, and this year we have added another class, the United States Constitution. Having the blessing and honor to spend time with children and shape and hopefully inspire young minds to know the full history of our country is something that we both strive for each day that we're in the classroom. I want to give you a few quotes from David McCullough, and then we'll get right into episode 12. David McCullough said, "A nation that forgets its past can function no better than an individual with amnesia." He also said, "Love of learning will never let you down. You can have a quest for money, you can have a quest for power, and you can have a quest for fame, and they are sometimes gratifying and sometimes self-destructive. The love of learning is always gratifying and never self-destructive. The more educated, the more cultivated a society becomes, better off is everybody." So true. And the last quote from him, "History is not just about dates and quotations. And it's not just about politics, military, and social issues, though much of it, of course, is about that. It's about everything. It's about life history. It's human, and we have to see it that way. We have to teach it that way. We have to read it that way. It's about art, music, literature, money, science, love. The entire human experience." We lost a great advocate and voice for history and the American Revolution. I don't have all of his accolades. He's won the highest honor, highest medal you can get as a civilian from the president. He has the Pulitzer Prize, I believe, 2 times. The list goes on and on. So it was a great loss. And when I heard that news, I never met him, unfortunately, but I felt like I did know him. And so when he passed away, it hurt because I know that his voice will not be expressing anything new. And that's kind of sad for me. But at any rate, check out some of the links that I'll put in the show notes. I think you'll enjoy them. All right. Back in episode 10, we discussed several acts that turned up the dial in Boston, and tensions were ever increasing, and the events that we're going to discuss now didn't do anything to lower it. On November 5th in 1767, England sent some reinforcements, well, 3 people actually, to join the American Board of Customs. The board was pretty much in existence to enforce and collect duties, and they were paid like people getting paid today. They received commissions. So the more that the board collected from the colonists, the more money they made individually. And let's just say the board was not shy on trying to collect as much money as possible. Most history books leave it at that. But now for some truth. This board paid informers a very good percentage of the bounty of a ship in violation. So this board would pay people to be spies and report back to them. Any ship that was not paying duties or not reporting all of their cargo. And some received up to 33% of the total value confiscated. One would think that would yield a lot of informers, and initially it did. At any rate, the 3 new board members that arrived were Charles Paxson, Henry Holton, and William Birch. And the total number of people on this board was 5 people. Now, Holton and Birch had 0 experience in collections, so they had a pretty rough start. And within a few weeks, they had already set up their office or their headquarters, hired some staff, and they wasted no time in starting to collect duties. Bostonians provided, as you can imagine, as much grief to the board and everybody associated with it whenever they could. They were not allowed to board ships, they were threatened, their homes were vandalized, and windows were broken, and the like. The board members pretty much couldn't go anywhere without confrontation. And even within a few weeks, the board, was already requesting military support and backup, as the board was not only being harassed by the citizens, but they really couldn't do their job, and they were stopped from doing their job. Ships were sent to help the board, including a very large 50-gun ship called the HMS Romney, and that arrived in May. Now, England has a history, and they liked to have and provide a good show of force. Here you have a small board who cannot do their job, so England sends several ships, and one, a very big ship with big guns. Now, we spoke about him a few episodes back, but John Hancock was making a lot of money at the time in Boston via his ships and trade, and many have said smuggling. He refused to pay duties, and although he didn't support rioting or violence, he was very much part of the Sons of Liberty. He was also the richest man in Boston, if not the entire colonies. And a week before the HMS Romney arrived, Hancock's ship arrived in port. And I absolutely love the name of his ship, which was called the Liberty. On June 10th, his ship, the Liberty, was seized by the customs clerk, providing a reason that he wasn't paying all the duties that he should have. Now, after digging into this a little bit more, I believe that in fact, that's what happened. Hancock, prior to the ship being seized, had offloaded quite a bit of cargo, mostly wine. Now, he had molasses and Madeira and wine, but he offloaded quite a bit of that in order to reduce the duties or taxes that he would have to pay. When the Liberty was seized, a small mob that was protesting this threw rocks at the crew and made it as least comfortable as possible. And I dug around and I found someone's account that they wrote down of at least some of the interaction between the crowd and the custom agent. So Malcolm was a smuggler and Hallowell was the controller that was trying to enforce the law. Quote, "You had better let the vessel be at the wharf," said Malcolm. "I shall not," said Hallowell, and gave directions to cut the fasts of the ship. "Stop at least until the owner comes," said the people who crowded round. "No, damn you," cried Hallowell. "Cast her off. I'll split out the brains of "Any man that offers to receive a fast or stop the vessel," said the master of the Romney. And he shouted to the Marines to fire. "What rascal is that who dares to tell the Marines to fire?" cried a Bostoner, and turning to Harrison the collector, who was a well-meaning man, who disapproved the violent manner of the seizure, added, "The owner is sent for. You had better let her lie at the wharf till he comes down." "No, she shall go," insisted the controller. "Show me the man who dares oppose it." "Kill the damned scoundrel," cried the master. "We will throw the people from the Romney overboard," said Malcolm, stung with anger. "By God, she shall go," repeated the master, and he more than once called to the Marines, "Why don't you fire?" and bade them to fire. So they cut her moorings, and with ropes in the barges, the sloop was towed away to the Romney. The mob, which was led by Malcolm, followed the custom house officers, pelted them with stones and other missiles, and broke the windows of their offices. The mob then seized a pleasure boat that was owned by the collector, and after dragging it through the town, they burned it on the common, and then they quietly dispersed. Now, as the ship was taken out further, the ship being the Liberty, as the ship was taken out further so the mob couldn't retrieve it and to escape the items being thrown at them, it got worse. The remaining officials that were still on the dock, I'm not sure why they stuck around, but they were there. Those officials were beaten severely with clubs, large stones, sticks, fists. They were beaten so bad that during it, their clothes were either torn off or they fell off from the beating. It was pretty brutal, and the message that was sent to the board, the collectors, and for that matter England, was pretty crystal clear. The message was that the colonists were done paying tax after tax, duty after duty, and the countless acts upon acts weren't going to be adhered to any longer. The Board of Commissioners offered to give Hancock his ship back, probably in an effort to calm the entire situation down. But good old Sam Adams and the other Sons of Liberty members urged him to not take that deal. They claimed it would make him look like he was working with them, kind of making a deal with the enemy. So he did refuse the officer and never took his ship back. In fact, he never got his ship back. And even though they couldn't prove in court that he had wine on board and he never paid the full duties, they did charge him with other small violations. Now, due to these violations, the entire ship and all of its contents were confiscated. The customs office put the ship, the Liberty, up for auction, but nobody would bid on it or buy it. The new owner would likely encounter a mob and deal with the same issue that the custom clerks went through, and I can guarantee you that nobody was willing to do that. Eventually, the ship was sent out by the Royal Navy after changing the name, under the name of HMS Romney, and it came back to port a couple of years later. One would think that was the end of it, but a mob apparently never forgets. As they saw the ship come into port, they boarded it, immediately knew it was John Hancock's. They took everything of value, and then they set it on fire. The thousands in the streets in Boston, the threats of the confiscation of John Hancock's ship, all of this became known as the Liberty Riots or the Liberty Affair. And after things settled down a bit, the Sons of Liberty used these instances as ammunition for the cause of becoming independent. They, and this is going to sound familiar, claimed that they were being taxed without representation. This phrase is so commonly used that I think it starts to lose its meaning and luster. Any act, tax, or duty by England was just that. It was taxation without representation. The colonies did not have anybody in Parliament who spoke up for them. They did not have any legislatures to voice the opinion of the people, and nor could they cast a vote. So it really was true, and you have heard it a million times, most famously by Patrick Henry, but if you're being taxed without being representative over and over and over again, it starts to take a toll. And we see this here in addition to many other instances. The Sons of Liberty, they published newspaper articles, essays, and personal opinions on how unfair the ship seizure was and how unjust and illegal it was. Now, if somebody was in Boston sitting on the fence of, I'm going to side with England, I want to stay under her wing, or I'm really kind of leaning toward independence, I feel that many people started to really see independence as a more viable option. Now, let's not forget that they tried everything they could to convict John Hancock for not paying duties. He was never found guilty. They did everything they could, and they did not leave any stone unturned. Now, something that is rarely discussed during this event is who did John Hancock hire as an attorney to represent him? He hired John Adams. And here is, I pulled up what he wrote about this event. And John Adams, we're going to have a whole series of bonus episodes on him. He's one of the most amazing founders, amazing men, amazing leaders, who had the most amazing wife, that being Abigail Adams. But at any rate, here is what he wrote about the Liberty Affair, or John Hancock's ship being seized. In the fall of the year 1773, a great uproar was raised in Boston on account of the unlading in the night of a cargo of wines from the sloop Liberty from Madeira belonging to Mr. Hancock without paying the customs. Mr. Hancock was prosecuted upon a great number of libels for penalties upon acts of Parliament amounting to 90 or 100,000 pounds sterling. He thought fit to engage me as his counsel and advocate, and a painful drudgery I had of his cause. There were few days through the entire winter when I was not summoned to attend the Court of Admiralty, the Admiralty Court. It seemed as if the officers of the Crown were determined to examine the entire town as witnesses. Almost every day a fresh witness was to be examined. They interrogated many of his rear relations and most intimate friends and threatened to summons his amiable aunt, the relict of his uncle Tom Hancock, who had left the greatest part of his fortune to him. I was thoroughly weary and disgusted with the court, the officers of the Crown, the cause, and even with the tyrannical bell that dongled me out of my house every morning, and this odious cause was suspended at last only by the Battle of Lexington, which put an end forever to all such prosecutions. If you have read a lot of how they spoke and how they wrote back then, you really start, I really start to enjoy it. Their wording, how they describe things, it's a lost form for sure in today's society. And, when what would become history to us during the heat of the moment or the battle or event, most people involved aren't thinking about saving items or preserving mementos. However, can you imagine if Hancock's ship would have been docked, saved, and could be visited today? I think that would make for a very amazing historical visit, but it, like so many other ships, homes, and businesses, have long since disappeared over time. I did look, but I could not find, unfortunately, any paintings, drawings, or even a sketch of his ship. Now, paintings were very expensive back then, and so really only the rich, the famous, the higher class, so to speak, ever had paintings of themselves done. So I can see why there's no painting of his ship. To them, it was just a ship. I do know that it was a sloop, complete with the large sails and the large mast, the type of ship that you may picture floating out in the bay or the ocean from this time period. So the dial now had moved up a couple notches, bringing the colonies to a high simmer I think, just a couple notches or a notch away from boiling. So what would England do next? Well, that is going to be our next episode, the occupation of Boston. I know in my previous episode I said I was going to discuss the occupation of Boston for this episode, but I felt that it was really important to know what happened with his ship and how things were really heating up. And this was a very big deal, and so I didn't feel like I could leave it out. So the occupation of Boston will be the next episode. And this occupation was a big deal, and it had major impact and consequences that propelled us into the war with England. I mean, England put soldiers in and around the town, and the mood and reality of what England was doing really ticked off the colonists, and it heated things up in a way that had never been done. In an upcoming show, not very far off in the future, we're going to talk about how this occupation led to what most people have heard of, the Boston Massacre. Before I go, I wanted to remind you of our show notes. I have been doing my best and trying to be very diligent in providing high-quality links that are related to the topics that we cover in our show. Please check them out. I handpick them out. I make sure that the links work. The best of what I can find for you. And some are pretty informative, right? While others are, well, they're just downright cool. So if you have a minute, check those out. Lastly, it being September 8th, did you know what happened on this day in history during the American Revolution? The Battle of Utah. That's EUTAW, not the state of Utah. So the Battle of Utah Springs took place on today's date, which was the last major battle of the Revolution. Now people are like, no, Yorktown was the final. Yorktown was a siege. It was not a battle. Big difference. However, this was the last major battle of the Revolution. It was also the deadliest. During the battle, 579 Americans and 882 British and Loyalists were either killed, wounded, or captured. The only reason it didn't start up the next morning was due to excessive rain. Rain saved countless lives. It's kind of odd when you think of it that way. I hope that you tune in for our next episode as we discuss everything that came along with, took place, and happened during the occupation of Boston. Thanks for listening, and hope that you tune in next time with us here at the Patriot Power Podcast. Make sure that you hit subscribe so you'll get notified when our new episodes are available for you. And we hope that you check out our websites, which include our show notes, links, documents, and more at patriotpowerpodcast.com or ilovegeorgewashington.com. Until next time, hope that you and your family have a blessed week. And remember, be safe and tell a veteran thanks for their service.